I am a musician, an artist manager, kind of a multidisciplinary creative, and I wanted to share some information today that hopefully feels helpful and actionable, but then also kind of open up the discussion to all of you as well of how you're pivoting and coping through this really strange time period, because I know we have a lot of smart people in the room who are implementing a lot of really great strategies. So I'm going to share the best information and tips I have, fully recognizing that it's a strange and unprecedented time for all of us, and I certainly don't have all of the answers. So I hope it sparks more of a discussion than, you know, some protocol you have to follow. So with that, we'll get started. Oh, here we go. All right, so some disclaimers up front too that I want to get out of the way. First of all, this strange time period that we're in is not an artist retreat. You should not feel pressured necessarily to create, you know, your masterwork, to write your new album, you know, put up your new studio show, write a novel, whatever it is. This is a global pandemic, and it's totally normal to feel scared, unmotivated, uncertain. And I don't want this to feel like pressure for you to go out and launch a new business as if everything is normal. So with that, I want to say, like, all the advice we're going to talk about today is given as a lower priority than handling the safety and well-being of yourself and your people. That might be your family unit, your circle of friends, your employees if you run a small business, your staff if you run a nonprofit. And with whatever bandwidth you have after doing those things, I hope maybe you're able to start considering some of these ideas. All right. So this is who I am. My name's Bree. Here's a picture of me in some brighter, sunnier days when we were allowed to be outside and play instruments for people and wear cool jackets. So I am a saxophonist by trade. That's how I got my start. I do artist management work. I own my own business. I tour manage for my band. Sometimes I've done booking, publicity work, marketing, and I'm also a person who's working in what's currently a totally collapsed industry, which is live performance, live events, and live music. So I'm right there with you as far as someone who's experiencing the direct effects of what's going on during this crisis. But I also feel like I'm someone who is, you know, set up decently well to weather this storm. So a little bit about my path to get here. I went to school as a musician, trained, got actually 2 music degrees, got my master's in jazz studies, which is not at the top of anyone's list for practical career paths. And then after school, ended up working a number of arts administration and arts marketing roles, where I kind of always got into those fields. I worked with an orchestra, and then I ended up working with the UNC College of Performing and Visual Arts. And I led with my broad knowledge of those career fields, like of the subject matter at hand. So of the arts, how to talk with artists, how to talk with audiences and communicate about the arts, and picked up a lot of these other skills along the way, which include digital marketing skills, website design, you know, publicity work, management, all of these things. And I always knew, as someone who owns a band, manages a band, and plays live a lot and is working towards the goal of hopefully touring a lot more, that I needed to have a mix of things that, you know, were in-person events, but also some remote work. And I think that's a really good idea to think about, having multiple income streams and some kind of mix of in-person and possibly remote income or work that you can have at all times, not only in this crisis, because as an artist, it is really hard to scale yourself. You can't physically be in all of these places, and you're going to kind of tap out your capacity there. So hopefully some of the things we're going to talk about today not only are helpful right now, but are something that makes your business more sustainable long-term as well. All right. So let's start with the idea that anytime multiple income streams are a good idea during this current crisis we're dealing with, but also just as a general practice for your business. So some reasons you want to have multiple income streams for your organization, your business, your individual artistic practice. Number one, that you can generate revenue without having to physically be everywhere to generate it. This is one of the limitations of being a gigging musician, is even if you're doing really well, let's say you're a jazz pianist, you're out playing somewhere 6 or 7 nights a week, there's kind of a ceiling on how much revenue you can generate. There's a ceiling on what the market will pay you for that work. And it also is just really physically exhausting to do that all the time. So you might tap out kind of your physical capacity to do that work as well. That's why it's nice to have some other income streams that come from remote work or passive income or whatever it might be generated from your artwork. So it's also a way to engage with your audience year-round or engage with your audience in ways that aren't just tied to in-person events. So if you are an arts organization that kind of primarily presents live events, having some other income streams or things in your wheelhouse allows you to keep engaging with those people even when they aren't face-to-face with you, and kind of develop those connections and hopefully build even stronger engagement that when we do have live events again is going to build a stronger connection and more value. Multiple income streams also life-proof and crisis-proof your livelihood and your career path. So besides what we're all experiencing now with this pandemic, there's a ton of other reasons why you want to have a diversified income stream. And there are a lot of things I think we don't actually talk about a ton in the arts, because there's a ton of big lifestyle changes that happen for everyone throughout their career. Maybe you are going through a big move or a lifestyle change, or a partner is. Maybe you are wanting to start a family, or you're having like an additional child. That often can kind of stop or put a pause on certain streams of work for a while, particularly in music. You know, live performance makes it kind of challenging. And maybe you also want to life-proof the fact that you might have future health issues or other short-term crises. The truth is that, you know, unpredictable and sometimes challenging things happen to all of us. And it's better, I think, to have some contingency plans of how we'll deal with those things rather than to just react after they happen. So that's another reason for this, and hopefully a reason it will continue to be helpful long-term. So some kind of simple ways to start, some maybe lower hanging fruit as far as developing some additional income streams. So if you have any kind of physical product, whether you're an artist and you sell work in a gallery, or you typically work with corporate clients, or you're a musician and you sell merchandise, you know, you're an arts organization and you have some kind of physical toolkit, put any physical product you have online and make it available for shipping. I know a lot of you guys probably already are doing this, but it's a great idea, and it's pretty easy to enact. There's a lot of great tools to set up an online store pretty quickly, including Square, Shopify, as well as another client. A lot of Squarespace websites have built-in e-commerce, so something that technologically you should be able to set up pretty quickly. If you are an artist of any discipline who has typically worked for corporate clients or in a specific industry, begin offering commissioned work for individuals or individual organizations. Sometimes commissioned work is something that artists have to kind of say no to in the short term because it can become really time consuming. It might not be focused on their particular niche, but now's a great time to sort of start offering that again. Yeah. And then if you do any sort of in-person workshop content, if you have workshops and clinics that you've done, go ahead and develop that into online curriculum and resources. Just repurpose it, put it online. And then also, let's also make sure that your work is available on all monetized platforms. So I particularly think about the music industry in this way. You want to make sure that you have the opportunity to get little streams of income everywhere that they exist. So if you're using a digital distributor, make sure your work is going to Spotify, to Amazon, Apple Music, all the big streaming services, but also put it on Bandcamp, where audiences can more directly engage and buy that work from you directly. And maybe also consider putting it in an online licensing library where it can be used for other media and you can get some revenue that way. Just make sure you're accessing all what's already out there, all the available channels. All right. Excuse me. So finding new clients, even when your industry has totally collapsed. This is something I want to talk about and kind of generate some ideas and maybe some conversation. And by the way, feel free to ask questions in this at any time. You can send them via Q&A or via the chat to Meredith, and then she can chime in and ask those right away. Sorry, just wanted to check one thing.
Yeah, we have a question actually, Bree. Someone, Aaron is asking, what kind of licensing services are out there? Do you recommend any of them?
Yeah, and Aaron, I'd love to know if you, kind of what your discipline is, if you're asking specifically about music, or if you're asking about like visual artwork or another medium. Making the assumption that you're asking about music, there are a lot of, so without getting too in the weeds, music licensing for media, what we call sync licensing. Gotcha, web developer, online musician clients. So that industry itself is also kind of this weird, brave new world. It's not regulated in the same way that other royalties are, where there's like one channel to go through and there's a set rate that you get for certain media. In summary, there are music supervisors, you know, a lot of them work out in Los Angeles that work for media companies and kind of handpick certain media from clients. And a lot of those relationships are just developed one-on-one. But in addition, there are also these online music licensing libraries for kind of like more broad kind of work or more or smaller projects. So some examples are MusicBed is one of them that I know has been around for a while. I'm blanking on names of other specific ones, but I would just search like, you know, online music licensing libraries. The truth is that like in the long term, a better strategy for those is probably developing some relationships with music supervisors so you can have the best opportunity to negotiate. But in the short term, putting some available work, particularly if it's not released anywhere else, particularly if it's like instrumental tracks that might be used behind something like a wedding music video, or, you know, kind of as a bed for some kind of, you know, workshop content or professional content, those licensing libraries like will pay out a decent amount for those and are kind of like an easy access. So, yeah, that's a great question, and happy to also like follow up after this with some more specific links and resources. All right, so continuing to talk about finding some new clients. Let me close this chat window. All right, one thing I'm seeing during this crisis, and I also honestly see a lot before this crisis was happening as well, is that artists often are pitching their work to other broke artists. I want to say that like building community with other artists and arts organizations is really critical and necessary. I still think people should do it. I think people should be collaborating creatively, both just to kind of build up the community, but also for everyone's individual creative and mental health. I think all of that is really important, but it doesn't often pay your bills. What I see a lot of is like musicians trying to sell their $10 albums to other musicians who are also all in the same boat. Or arts organizations, you know, asking their donor base, who a lot of them might be artists suffering from this as well, to pay for something or engage in something, and it's just not a great strategy. So during this time period, it's really helpful to think about who is willing to pay for what you have to offer, and how can you make that valuable enough that they will pay? And how can you also make your content, kind of split this difference between like putting your content out there so people can find it, but also sort of building enough trust that people will pay to access it. All right. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot during this time period is like, what populations and what industries have more money than time right now? And this is not at all a definitive list. This is just sort of what I've brainstormed. But who in this crisis is still working full-time? Who might even be working a larger workload or a more demanding workload, is still getting paid some kind of regular salary or income, and has maybe not necessarily a ton of monetary resources, but has more money than they have available time to offer right now. So things I've come up with are some healthcare professionals, kind of the whole healthcare industry right now, which is really stretched pretty thin as far as just staffing and handling, you know, on the front lines of this crisis. Also some working parents who now, you know, maybe for the first time are working from home full-time and trying to homeschool their kids full-time, or at least supervise their children as they're accessing online educational content. Public servants as well, people in local government or support organizations who are putting together a lot of resources for people and still working full-time. Also news media who are reporting on this crisis and who are just pumping out a lot of content. Those might be areas of opportunity where as artists and creatives, we can engage and meet some kind of need. So the next thing to think about is how can you solve a specific problem for these populations? So you might want to identify a specific need that a client or industry has. Excuse me. And quickly and efficiently develop a solution to meet that need. Don't worry about beta testing it over and over, you know, or like having this long trial period before launch. How can you quickly get something out there that meets a need? And then pitch your specific solution rather than a broad set of skills. So I see this, prior to all of this in the music booking environment, for instance, one thing that I would tell musicians is that when you're pitching to venues to try and say book a show for your band, the mistake I see a lot of individuals make is that they pitch way too broadly and they don't solve a specific problem for these venues. So they might say, hey, here's my band, here's our info. We'd love to play at your venue sometime. You know, let us know if you have any openings. That is a really challenging inquiry for someone like a venue owner to meet because it takes a lot more work on their part to check the calendar, to see what's going to be the right fit, to send back a selection of dates. And just the barrier for response there is a lot higher than the alternative, which is a musician pitching to solve a specific problem, saying, hey, we're coming through. This week, I noticed on your calendar online already that you have this date available. We'd love, you know, to pitch for this specific date and play your venue. Then the venue owner knows, here's an option to fill the room that night. They're solving a specific problem. So think about this new sort of reality in the same way. Rather than saying, hey, I'm a visual artist, I'm suddenly out of a lot of work because I used to teach all these in-person workshops and, you know, at a studio space, and now that's not happening, just hoping to do whatever I can. Develop something that meets a specific need. Hey, I've rolled out a set of homeschool art curriculum. It's available on my website. You can download it immediately. their activities that kids can complete, in approximately half an hour, whatever it might be. So that's my recommendation there. A couple case studies that I've seen from individual creatives that I know, actually, I do have a visual artist friend and client who normally, even not during this time period, does homeschool her 4 children, as well as being a working freelance visual artist. So she's actually an expert in that area. And this week, she's put out resources, homeschooling resources for other parents. I have another friend who is also a working musician, but then has a remote business doing web design work for clients. And she is offering, instead of just like her full web design package, some stripped down single page websites, more flexible packages for people who suddenly might have some time on their hands or a need to get a website launched really quickly. So people solving specific needs. Another great thing to do during this time is to try and reconnect with old clients. So one thing I do both for myself as an individual creative of my business, but also on behalf of the clients I work with as a manager, I save client leads somewhere, even if they're not a great fit at the time that they come in. This is the case with a visual artist client I work with who tends to be really busy, has a really high inquiry load. There's a lot of things that come in that just for whatever reason, for scheduling or for the scope of the project, aren't a great fit at the time. And we have to say no. But there's always the possibility that those leads could prove useful in the future. So I just save these. I make a habit of doing that in an email folder. And that really can come in handy now. So if you have some way of going through old leads, if you have those saved, consider what you have time to do now that you've said no to before. For me personally, I've said no a lot in my business in the past year to marketing projects and kind of social media management projects because I was doing a lot of work with live events and full service management. Now that's kind of shifted. And so I'll probably reach back out to some of those leads and say, hey, I'm available actually to do this marketing project. Let me know if you'd like to connect. Reach back out to those people with a reintroduction to you and your work. And I'd also recommend an update if anything has changed since your last interaction. Hey, I'm reaching back out, just wanted to let you know I have more time to do this. Also wanted to let you know that since we last spoke, I've worked on X, Y, and Z projects. I've built experience in this area. Here's something online you can check out as proof of that experience. And then also, when you're re-engaging, lead with an opportunity for them rather than asking for pity. I think it's important to be authentic. It's even okay to say, hey, this this pandemic has canceled a lot of my live event work, but I've found more time actually to take on marketing clients. And the great news is that I've launched this new set of services kind of tailor-made for what you've been asking for. So make it an opportunity for them. Again, solve a specific problem and see if there's a way to re-engage. And I would recommend doing this a lot. Not everyone's going to say yes. Not everyone's going to email you back, but all you need is some level of engagement from these folks. So this is just a good habit to get into all of the time. And then I'd also recommend reconnecting with any old networks you have that you may not have spent a ton of time engaging with recently. So maybe that's different professional groups, young professionals groups, business organizations, community organizations. Maybe it's your college network that you were in school with and that is also in your discipline. Maybe it's different virtual communities. There's a lot of great freelancer groups, communities on Facebook or Instagram or even LinkedIn. And these are a great place, not necessarily to pitch your work, but to just check in with other people in your field and see how they're handling this. Maybe you'll get some ideas. Maybe you can brainstorm some ways that you're all coping through this, share resources. I think it's also really important to do that during this time period. All right. Moving on. All right, so pitching new skills and really encouraging you guys to take on new ideas and new frontiers during this time period with confidence. So I'd start by thinking about adjacent industries to wherever you're working. And this is just a short list. I know you guys are creative and smart and will come up with a ton of connections here. But if you've primarily been working on one area, what's kind of one way that's maybe a step to the right or a step to the left that's similar to the work you can do that you can leverage? So if you've been giving or booking educational workshops, can you now spin that into experience to develop online curriculum for teachers or students? If you have been in live production as a sound engineer or videographer, can you now pivot to sound mixing and video editing for all this wealth of content that's being created? If you have been an event planner, maybe a wedding planner whose industry has kind of been put on pause, can you pivot some of that work and that knowledge to more general virtual assistant services? So just think about what's a step or two adjacent to something you've already been doing. And think about also developing a minimum viable product in these new areas and industries. I think because we're creatives and because we're artists, we want whatever work we make to be really, really good. That's just our instinct. And I think we're often hesitant to share that work or that service or that product before it's the best it can possibly be. I want you to kind of toss out that mentality and think really hard about how quickly can you get something out into the world at this time period? And how can you also use that as an opportunity to test a number of new things? So minimum viable product is just a version of a product or service that has just enough features to satisfy early customers and provide you feedback for developing that product or that service more in the future. A minimum viable product is typically low cost for you to create. It has really clear and simple features. So if you're launching, maybe you're for the first time getting into artist management and assistant services. Maybe instead of offering the whole kitchen sink or a whole gamut of features, you just launch with one specific set of services like calendar management or website development or just scheduling for that person. Minimum viable product is also something that launches quickly and it's something that can be easily tested and modified. Your goal here is not to have your forever business model or your forever product, but something that can get you information about your customers and your audience really quickly that then you can take back and continue tweaking and modifying what you're doing. And also during this time period, as you're maybe launching new ideas, new services, new content, trust the broad experience and the expertise you have about your industry. It's such a strange time and all of us are going through something new. You're not the only person who's going through something new. Pretty much all of us are, and we have that shared experience. So don't worry if you're offering something that you've never done before. Maybe you've primarily worked in live events. Maybe you're a musician who's primarily done live performance and you're teaching online for the first time ever. Don't necessarily worry that you've never done it before. Trust that you have broad experience teaching, performing, and you can leverage that in a new medium. Also during this time period, people are primarily going to hire you because of their personal connections to you first. So lean on that, lean on connecting with people you already know on some personal level, rather than trying to cold call clients or cold email new customers, or really hone in on maybe like social media ad campaigns to audiences who have never engaged with you. Start with your inner circle of contacts. I think that's a good place to start. Your broad knowledge of your field is going to guide you through new ventures. What I have really learned in arts marketing and administration is that the knowledge of the subject material is the most critical. And you can learn any new piece of technology or skill. You can learn how to build a website. You can learn social media platforms. You can learn marketing, language, and tactics. That's a lot easier to learn than the specific ins and outs of talking with opera audiences about opera and being an expert on that. Or talking with visual artists about art history. So trust the artistic and creative experience that you have. All right, so right now is also a great time to be building out all different kinds of content, because that's really one of the only channels we have. We can't necessarily gather in person, we can't interact face-to-face, but we can engage online, and that's all run by the content we create. So this is something I would have said prior to this crisis too, but if you are an artist or creative, you basically run a small content company. Now, maybe your primary content before this time period was live performance or live events, but consider now you're just pivoting that to maybe online or digital content. So consider first, what's the best fit for your audience? How old is your audience? Where are they located? What kind of time do they have available? What platforms are they on? Where are they already engaging? And then what can you make right now with the tools you already have? So it doesn't have to be a super high production video. It doesn't have to have super high production audio. You don't have to have a whole home studio setup if you're a musician and you've never done that before. What can you get started with just, you know, a phone camera, one microphone, simple or free video editing services, you know, maybe online workshops or resources. And I would also say that right now is kind of this unprecedented time to try something new and weird. One really interesting thing that's happening in this moment is that pretty much everyone, regardless of the resources they have available or the notoriety they have as a famous performer or artist, they're all being leveled down to the same place. The playing field has kind of been evened out because no one can get together. You know, we're all broadcasting things from our homes. I'm sitting here presenting in my home office. So I think there's kind of an opportunity to maybe explore a little bit outside of the brand you've had and do something that's more personal, that feels a little bit more vulnerable, that feels a little bit more DIY or homemade than things you've done before, and people are going to be understanding of that. So don't be afraid to branch out. Some different content channels to leverage. You guys probably know about doing all of this, but you want to have a strong website, even if it's pretty simple. Kind of consider that your digital business card and also your storefront if you are selling any physical products. Social media, which is sort of your daily check-in and connection with your audience. You do not have to be on every social media platform. I'd consider the one or two where your audience are most likely to be spending time and engaging, and really invest strategically in those platforms. And then this is also a great time if you haven't already built an email newsletter audience that's robust, to invest in that channel. That's going to be your most engaged digital audience. They have to opt into that communication. They have to stay engaged with it. Those people are kind of higher or further down the funnel. We have a chat question. Oh. I thought we did. So just a few different channels to leverage there. If you're not already doing those, I would say make sure that's already going on. And then this is kind of the way I think about content and engagement. This is my kind of quick and dirty version of this idea. If you work in any kind of donor engagement, you're probably already really familiar with this idea. If you work in any marketing or sales, you're also familiar with this idea, which is how we take customers from first interactions with our work to becoming long-term engaged, sustaining audience members or patrons or customers. So on the sort of top tier with your content, this is where people are first encountering you and your work. So maybe that's a Google search for something that you do and they come across your website. Maybe it's finding you on social media and they're just sort of casually engaging. From there, we want to take people to this tier 2, which is seeing you as maybe a free, valuable resource. So maybe they're starting to read blog posts that you create. Maybe they're checking out your resource list. They're starting to see you as a trusted source in your field. And then maybe they subscribe to your email newsletter. From that, in this tier 3, you can think about that's where your premium content is housed. That's where people start to actually pay for the work that you're generating. So maybe this is something that's behind a paywall. Maybe it's on something like a Patreon, where you actually have subscribers paying on a monthly basis. Maybe it's moving from engagement with your broad resources to targeted one-on-one consultations. You want to kind of move people along into that content level. And then in this tier 4 is the idea of a sustaining supporter, that you've provided so much value during this time that these are the people who are going to want to continue following your work, sustaining your work, paying for your work, even past the time that this crisis ends. And I think this is a really great opportunity during this time period to find those people who are your core audience and your sustaining supporters. You don't need everyone to engage with your work. You really kind of need a small inner circle of engaged people. So, all right. I'll also say a couple other things about content in general. Don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel here. Probably if you run an arts organization or if you're you have an artistic discipline, you have a lot of old content that can be repurposed. Whether that is live recordings of workshops that you've done in the past. Maybe it's resource lists that you've, sorry, I'm plugging in my computer, which is important. Resource lists that you can repurpose. If there's something that has been helpful in the past and maybe people haven't engaged with it in a while, there's nothing wrong with kind of pushing that to the front if it's relevant material. Can you explore your archives and dig up stuff that's interesting or relevant for your audience? And also with your content, realize that it doesn't have to be perfect, especially during this time period. We're all learning new technologies with sort of, this new digital landscape. So put out quality work, but it doesn't have to be perfect work. It just has to be valuable work to your audience. All right. And I'll also say, if you're in this time period and you're stuck and there's not a lot of opportunity right now in the short term to generate revenue, one thing that you can do that will, I think, make you feel productive and like you're planning ahead is just to plan ahead for your practice or your organization and batch work all of the stuff that you typically don't have time for. So think about those things that you always put off. Maybe it's content creation, maybe it's research or systems building for your organization. Maybe it's skill building for yourself, and see how much of that you can get done now. So when we are back in a live event, robust market and time period, you already have that done. So some things to think about might be market research. What can you learn about your colleagues and competitors in your space? What articles can you read? And another thing might be kind of, admin backlog work, whether it's like filing, digital filing systems, developing better systems for your organization. Maybe that's your CRM, maybe it's your email newsletter system, maybe it's, organizing and sorting old data that you have. Content development is a huge thing during this time period. If you are an artist, you probably need to be creating video content all the time. That's definitely been the case with my band. So right now we're using that time period to make some music videos, go back through old live performance raw footage we have and edit it so we have that kind of in the can to continue pushing out during this time period. And maybe you also just use this as a creative time to build up a log of different resources. You challenge yourself to do a bunch of songwriting or a bunch of sketching, or brainstorm a huge list of donor engagement ideas, or journal a lot, or recipe test a ton of things, whatever applies to you in your industry. See what kind of volume you can create. And then again, when you get more busy in the future, you can dig through those archives and you have a bunch of things to already pull from. Finally, some sort of like free and low-cost resources, a few things that I like to access during this time, and this is by no means comprehensive. Lynda.com is an e-course platform that is available. You can access it through, I know up here in Greeley, through the High Plains Public Library District, but I believe through most public library districts, you can access that, and they have graphic design courses, Adobe software courses, lots of different courses for technological platforms specifically. Skillshare is another low-cost subscription model. They have a ton, like thousands and thousands of different professional courses, and I think you can get 30 days free, and then it's a pretty low-cost subscription. Lynda is available via Denver Public Libraries in the chat. Thank you for that addition. Canva.com, actually how I created this presentation right here, but it's a free design tool if you don't have an Adobe subscription or access to that software. And it's pretty darn good for creating things like social media, graphics, website graphics, presentations, etc. And then if you all are finding yourself suddenly doing a lot of social media, and maybe that hasn't been your job in the past, I really like Later.com. It's a social media scheduling platform. It has a free level and then also some basic subscription models, but that's a great way to batch that work as well. So rather than logging on every day and publishing something, you can batch out, a whole week's worth of content that gets scheduled for your social channels. And, that way you can protect a little bit of your mental health and not drive yourself crazy spending a ton of time on those platforms. So just a few different things I like there. And then that is the end of what I have for you guys. Here are some ways to connect with me. I'll leave this up for a second for you guys to kind of write that down. But I also want to open it up to any questions, comments, useful things that you guys have found. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bree. Well, we'll give people a moment to log on to their chat if folks have other questions or if you have other ideas. We'd love, with the time remaining, if folks who are on this webinar have employed other tactics, other strategies, trying out some new things with their creative work. We'd also love to hear those ideas, as well as if you have any questions. As people are thinking about that and hopefully chatting those in, I did want to mention CBCA has a pretty thorough resource page on our website. And I know there are people on the phone as well. So if you have, I think you can raise your hand if you're on the phone and you can't chat in. I think there's a few that are connecting that way. CBCA does have a very thorough resource page on our website with artist relief funds and information about the SBA loans and other webinars that are being offered. We're also building a separate page to share some of the digital content that our partners and Colorado creatives are putting out there. So that can hopefully become sort of a one-stop shop for online streaming concerts and virtual museum tours and online classes. So keep an eye on that on CBCA's website.
Mhm.
And then we actually have 3 webinars coming up next week, sort of a 3-part series. Bree, I was so glad that you mentioned about maximizing those online revenue streams. We're actually doing a 3-part workshop on those. The first one on April 1st is focusing on music. The second one on April 2nd is focusing on visual artists and writers. And then the third one on Friday is focusing on film. So teaching you about protecting your intellectual property and copyrights, and then how to leverage it in this sort of online economy. So those are coming up next week, April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Looks like we have a few comments. I'll let you, if you want to respond to some of those.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So Trey, first, Nikki wrote that they're the GM of Do 303 and a music photographer. If people want to reach out with their live streams or classes, they're happy to promote. That's do303.com. You guys can check that out as a support link. And then Trey has a really awesome comment, which is that there's already a deluge of free web events. And the pushback is that there's so much to do for free. And I totally agree with you. I'm a musician by trade, and I have found myself honestly not checking out a ton of like live stream free concerts because there's so many. So the question is about strategies for how to take advantage of being a service to the community and not get lost in that noise, and also build paid opportunities. I would think about engaging with kind of your core supporters as a priority first. So rather than, and maybe you do a mix of things, like you provide some free content to all of your social media followers or some resource lists, but then you also offer more targeted, more advanced, more specific content to people you've already had some history of engaging with in the past. I think curation and expertise during this time is huge, because there is so much free content, but there's not helping people kind of navigate through what is quality. If you're a parent who right now who's overwhelmed with like finding homeschooling resources, of course you can go easily Google free at-home homeschooling resources, but it's still overwhelming. I would hope that there's an audience of people that would pay for some kind of curation of that material, and maybe that's something to think about and leverage. So hopefully that idea is helpful. Again, I'd like try and re-engage with people you have a history with. Maybe it's old client leads you haven't been able to address in the past. Maybe it's people who have already paid you for a service in the past. Those are going to be the people most likely to pay for work now.
Yeah, I'll interject a few examples that I've seen that I think are pretty neat. And I hope they're new, so time will tell how successful they'll be. But I know there's a Northern Colorado sort of live stream showcase every Saturday, and they're encouraging all of the musicians that are performing as part of that. And I think it's just a Facebook live stream event, but each one is posting their Venmo app or whatever their way to get online payments and sort of encouraging donations. And I think that's important that that was part of the program from the start. And hopefully we'll set an expectation by seeing that front and center. And another example is the Denver Film Society. They've had already had plans and agreements with film distributors for some new release movies. So not what's already streaming on your Netflix, but new movies that we're going to be showing at the C Film Center, which is now closed. So you can go onto Denver Film's website as if you're buying a ticket to go to the film center, but instead at a lower cost, you can buy a ticket to stream a movie for like 48 hours. So you're still buying a ticket, you're still valuing and purchasing that quality content that, to your point, where you can't get anywhere else. It's something special, it's curated, but you're helping people make that connection that this is something I would normally pay for, and it's special and I should still find a way to pay for it.
And I think Patreon is a platform that is that I have seen anyways, it's probably like, you know, one of the best at sort of leveraging different levels of engagement and, you know, sort of free versus freemium versus premium content, because you can set up different levels of engagement. So you could have a $3 a month subscriber who gets one kind of video or one piece of content, but then you can have your $15 or $20 or $50 a month subscriber who's getting kind of all your best stuff. I've seen some LA musicians who normally are on the road all the time launching Patreon channels like this, and they're actually really interesting. And you know, they're kind of trickling out teasers of some of that content for free to, I think, kind of engage people and hook them in, and then hopefully kind of growing that engagement to higher levels of paid subscription and in that model. So good think about that. And then Renee has a comment. I've been thinking about MVP, minimum viable product, wanting to provide a service or product that is most accessible, not only for the consumer, but for the creator as well. How does accessibility play a role in the future of the arts? And if you have any ideas, thank you. That's such a good comment and a good conversation that I don't know if I particularly am an expert on, but I will say that I think our current reality for everyone is really bringing to the forefront accessibility issues that have existed long before this. The fact that so many live events and live offerings of artists and arts organizations are already not accessible to a large portion of the population. And not only is that, I think, an area of growth, like there's a lot of ethical reasons to approach accessibility, but it's also like a huge part of the market that artists and arts organizations are ignoring. So I hope, like, long-term, even when we do get back to live events and some of these, things that have been our bread and butter, that artists are still considering, continuing with some of the models that we're building during this time, whether that's online content and engagement, providing content in multiple languages, providing different levels of accessibility financially to their work. Hopefully that is kind of, I don't know if that totally addresses the question, Renee, but I'd also love to hear from other people who sort of work in this area a lot more than I do as well.
I think, just to piggyback on your entire presentation, Bree, if you as a creative can help other creatives make their work more accessible. So if you speak another language and are able to help translate people's websites or create captions, if that you have an expertise in, reaching different populations, that could be really valuable in this particular time. So I think that's just one of the many untapped skills that could be really relevant and useful right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so hopefully, my hope is that a lot of the systems and things we're sort of being forced to create right now continue to carry on even when we're out of this crisis period. And I hope that it's going to make our artists and arts organizations stronger and more relevant, and have them providing more value in the long run.
Well, thank you. We're just about at time. So thank you, Briana. Thank you for this great presentation, and for all of you for staying online and participating. I realized I wasn't recording at the very beginning, so I'll just give a shout out to the Kenneth King Foundation, who is helping to fund CBCA's Advancing Creatives programming. We have a lot more webinars and content that will be coming out to really help artists through this challenging time, but also past it and into their future, to help them build their business, be stronger entrepreneurs, provide some professional development support. We have 3 webinars coming up next week with one of our Colorado Attorneys for the Arts attorneys named Max Haas. He'll be talking about copyrights and protecting your work in the online economy. Again, April 1st, we'll be focusing on music. April 2nd, we'll be focusing on visual artists and writers. And April 3rd, we'll be focusing on film. Those are all happening at 11:30 a.m. on those days. And please keep in touch. We are here at CBCA to help you. We are so lucky in Colorado to have such a strong arts community, and we know we'll come out of this stronger together. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Bree, and have a good rest of your Friday.